Hi and welcome to another episode of Top Volts, and today we're going to be looking at this little Mini. This is the Rally Mini Cooper C7, first released in 1968 in their 9th edition catalogue. It's a rear-wheel drive running the RX motor. As you can see, you've got these lovely exposed brushes. This one's in pretty tidy condition. A few sort of wear and tear items with the glass and at the top being scratched for use, but overall the tyres and the wheels are in good condition. Be it the motor feels a little bit stiff, so probably requires a little bit of oil and maybe a little bit of fiddling just up by the pinion there, but the braids look to be in good condition. Once again, this is a contact via two brass tabs just on the top of the guide there, which is fairly common around the sort of 1967 onwards really. They changed them from being clipped on to being bolted on with a little brass nut. So what we'll do is we'll have a little closer look at this, take it apart and see if we can free this motor up a bit. It is really stiff. So we'll move on to that. Okay, so looking at this, the first job to do really is to remove the body shell, because we don't want to damage like the little light spotlight on the top and various other sort of stickers and other detail. As you can see, these areas there can be quite fragile, and also a pain to repair if you do break them, especially all these little lights at the front here on the front bumper. So to remove this body shell, what you have to do is, if you hold on to the front wheels and bring this ever so slightly forward, so you're pulling on the body shell forward, and what you want to do is just release that catch that's inside, because there's a catch inside the body shell and one on the back here, which normally is where the number plate would be. As you can see, that's all part of the chassis there. So I've released the front clip, so then that comes apart. The clip you want to release is this point here, where it just holds under there. If I can hide that in the right light, see, just there. So what you need to do is release that one first. So we put the body shell to one side, and that leaves us with the chassis. As you can see, quite a sort of tidy little bit of kit there. It sort of holds the whole mechanisms together. So what we should probably do first is remove this front axle. These can be a bit of a pain to remove because they are clipped in quite hard. So what I tend to do is just place your thumb over the axle on the point of connection, say there. Because what you don't want to do is put too much stress on the chassis and end up breaking something down here. So if you place your thumb over that and gently pull up, and then that releases, and then do the same the other side. And that way you don't put any other strain anywhere else. Let's put that to one side. And this moves us on to the guide, which once again is held on by two little retaining clips, you could say. Once again on that, just slightly turn that to the side and just pop that off like that. You can see all the wires all look to be in good condition there. And there you go, it's held in by a brass nut onto a plastic thread. And there's the brass connections there, touching the tops of the braids in there. And they literally run on that, making a connection via the wires down to the motor. Okay, so next job is to remove the motor. With these, the RX motor actually punches through the chassis there. So you don't want to try and force that off that way. Really what you want to do is just release from this side, really, as best you can. There's various methods. You know, I tend to use just this tool just to pop that off. just like that. Okay, so the wire's come away there, so we have to resolder that back on. These old wires, they can be quite brittle, because some of these cars are actually quite old. And now you should be able to release the front of that motor just from those two areas there. Yeah, even that rear axle is actually quite stiff as well. It looks to be possibly rubbing a bit over here. So we'll move the cog on the drive shaft here over, just to give a bit more space. We've got a bit of clearance there. Okay, let's have a little look at the motor. First impressions, it's very clean. It's a very, very clean motor. All the points of contact are very clean. The brushes are in good condition. The spring looks to be fairly new, actually. I'll just hold those brushes for a minute. Yeah, there is a good amount of spring to that. So I think a tiny bit of oil on this will soon free that up a bit. So what you want to do is just put a tiny bit on this motor cloth, just there, and also on the center spine. And once again up the front as well. Just a little bit on the spine, and a little bit on there. Perfect. Okay, so moving on to the rear axle, where this is quite stiff. I believe it's rubbing on the inside of this section there on the side of the brass bearing, and maybe a little bit in there as well. So this has been replaced at some point. It's slightly oversized, which is causing a little bit of friction. Sometimes you can get a little bit of corrosion on the actual drive shaft itself, on the rear axle there, sorry. So we'll relieve this from the chassis and have a little closer inspection. So once again, just place your thumb over the connection points, very carefully pull, and the same that side. So over the connection points and very carefully pull. Okay, and we just remove the rear wheels. There's a little bit of corrosion going on there. Let's remove this one as well. Once again, I think that side's not as bad. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to get some very fine sandpaper. That's much better actually. It's just taken off. It looks like it was possibly more surface rust. There you go, that's much better. Try to spin it in an even, not that it really matters because this is no sort of competition car, but me and my daughter do enjoy playing with them, but that's far better. And we'll just give this a tiny little bit of a perfect. And then what I tend to do, just to release a tiny bit around this edge there. So just placing that onto the plastic and then just taking off the smallest amount. And try and keep sort of even cuts, removing anything that's loose and left over. Just take off the raised areas where it touches the brass bearing. fit this all back up. Maybe put a tiny little bit of oil just inside there. Let's actually put that wheel back on. Once again, a tiny little bit of oil just inside there. Let's offer that back into the chassis. There you go, that's perfect. Okay, brilliant. So now we'll put the motor back in. Offer the guides back in. And then just gently line that up. Perfect. So they're literally click back into position. And before we put these braids back, guides, sorry, I'm just going to solder that back on. So I'll set the soldering iron up. Okay, so just place a tiny little bit of solder on there as well. Perfect. Okay, that's brilliant. So that's soldered back on. Just push that clear. Let's bring that back over. Okay, that's great. And then we just want to place the guide back into these points either side. So just line that up and then give it a gentle push. That's brilliant. Just remembering to put the guide back first before you put the front drive shaft back on. Sorry, not the first drive shaft, front drive shaft, the front axle. And then, like before, these can be quite stiff, so just support the chassis as best you can, and one side at a time. There you go, that's perfect. And it's so much freer. So now we'll put the body shell back on. So with the body shell, just place the backing first. So this, where the number plate is, back into place. And being careful not to pinch any cable wires. And then we just push that back in. That's perfect. So we'll quickly run this up just to make sure the motor's operating as it should. But that does feel 100 times better. So we'll just run this at a very low volt, just to allow these brushes just to seat themselves after we've been messing around with it. So we'll switch all that on, and I'll just lift the rear wheels ever so slightly. Just start the bolts low. Already that's running very free, and I'll slowly increase. That's perfect. Brilliant. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you've enjoyed it and found the content of use, possibly any tips that you think might have been useful. As always, if you have a tip or any advice, please leave a comment in the comment section. I'll try my best to get back to you. Any advice is great. It's always very, very appreciated. Well, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.